What's up, guys? It's Bromley at Empire Barbell, and today we're going to talk about your squat setup. Now, this isn't a typical dissection of the difference between high bar and low bar, or wide or narrow. We're going to go over the most important part of any setup, and that's what your abs are doing. So we're going to go over some proper bracing cues. We're going to make sure you know how to breathe and make sure you know how to move properly, so that by the time you get into the bottom position of the squat, you're actually in a position to put force back up into the bar. So anytime your spine is under a load, we want to make sure that we are optimizing your ability to be stable and to be coordinated so that you can manage that load effectively. So to give you a better idea on how to do it right, I'm first going to go over how to do it wrong. Now, thankfully, these cues are not thrown around so much today, but about 15, 20 years ago, right in line with the equipped lifting phenomenon, the technical approach of the day was to have a big arch. So what that means is that as you had the bar on your back and you set up, the idea was to arch as hard as you could and to push back into that arch as you descended. What does make sense is that arching brings your chest up, so it could be a cue to help you think about staying upright under a load. Also, guys like to think about pushing their chest and their shoulders back up into the bar to get a little bit of purchase on the bar. But it does so many things wrong that none of those things that it actually helps with are even worth mentioning. Now, the thing is, when you take a deep breath and you're pushing into a really tight belt, you get a lot of quick and dirty stability. Also, you get good at how you train. So if that's the way you approach it from the start, you're gonna be likely to be very comfortable in that positioning despite all of the things that it doesn't optimize properly. When you add in a triple ply canvas suit that compresses you even further, you're gonna get a ton of stability and compression in the bottom of the squat, regardless of how you're bracing. As long as you got a belly full of air and you're pushing your abs out, you're gonna be super tight. So let's kind of pick that apart a little bit. If I walk the bar back and I arch as hard as I can, and I'm maintaining that arch as I come back, a few things are happening. The most important thing that's happening is that my diaphragm is being pushed away from my pelvic floor. Think of your torso as a single unit. You can think of it as a can, you can think of it as a tube of biscuits. The idea is it should be braced isometrically in such a way that it is one rigid compressed unit. You want everything stacked. Now, what happens once you point them away is you create this pinch point and you lose that tension. Brian Alsger had a really good analogy where he set a weight plate on an empty soda can, and then he dented the can and tried it again, and the can collapsed. Your body kind of works the same way. So on top of the instability we get by pushing your diaphragm away from the pelvic floor and not being stacked on top of each other, we're also stretching your abdominals. Now try to think in what scenario it is ideal to have a muscle lengthened when you are trying to use it in a very aggressive, powerful way. Never really, right? You want muscles shortened, you want them contracted because they are always in a stronger position that way. So lengthening your abdominals in this arch position doesn't do you any favors. It doesn't make your midsection stronger. It actually makes it much, much weaker. Remember that when you're relying on the compression of a suit and a tight belt and a belly full of air, you're not actually training yourself to use the musculature in your midsection to create that stability. Now, for years of competitive powerlifting, if that's your number one primary goal, that might not be such a big deal, but the second you get taken out of that plane of movement that you're comfortable working in, you are going to open yourself up to some big issues. Strongman specifically, we have to bend over, we have to accommodate weird positions, we have to engage in a lot of spinal flexion as we load stones and pick up odd objects. If we do not have the ability to brace using our own God-given musculature, we are asking for trouble. It's not just that we're not going to perform, we're going to be very likely to get injured. Now, a lot of old school powerlifters today are falling apart. Even Dave Tate has done some video pieces on YouTube of him talking to his specialist as he tries to unfuck all the problems he's had over years of doing things a very specific way. Hip issues are very common in these lifters. Back issues are very common in these lifters. It's a false dichotomy to think that you have to run yourself into the ground if you want to put up good numbers. There's plenty of good lifters who have actually benefited their life despite engaging in a sport that tends to be degenerative, all right? They should be the same. The thing that keeps your spine healthy should also be the thing that allows you to move more efficiently. Remember, things like speed tend to be a little bit more God-given. Your ability to increase that over your lifetime is a little more limited. Strength is not. You can increase strength for basically as long as you're alive and viable enough to train hard. Building strength takes a long time, so if you don't have the longevity to stay in one piece, you're not going to be around long enough to get strong in the first place, right? So it's important that we take this all seriously. So aside from pointing your diaphragm and pelvic floor away from each other, lengthening your abdominal wall, we're also tilting your hips back. So we have this anterior pelvic tilt. Now this is a problem I dealt with, and I've talked about it before. I had so many back injuries being a dumb kid that I thought I had to arch my back super hard on every squat and deadlift I ever did, because that's how I was going to keep my spine safe. It was actually the exact opposite. It made a lot of my issues worse, and it now fused me with this really aggressive anterior pelvic tilt. So looking at the position of my pelvis, right now I have my pelvis tilted up, my glutes and hamstrings are contracted, they're tight. As I go back into my normal posture, which is the anterior pelvic tilt, my glutes and hammies are now stretched. So arched, my abdominals and my glutes and hammies are pre-stretched, and I already have a little bit of a back pump from my erectors being super tight. As I squeeze my glutes, my erectors neutralize a little bit, and now my glutes and hammies are in a tightened position. So tightened and contracted and ready to handle a big load at the bottom of the squat, pre-stretch, nice weak position. So for those of you that have ever had issues with a butt wink, typically what happens is starting in this anterior pelvic tilt and coming down into the squat, you only get so low before you can't go any further, and everything has to round back down to accommodate that extra range of motion. So you start with your hips back, hammies are tight, you come down, 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 you can't go any further, so the hips have to roll under to accommodate that extra motion. What you'll find is if you start with your hips set properly, your glutes tight, your hamstrings pre-contracted, that it tends to eliminate that issue. So right now I'm arched, I'm coming down, 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 I get to the very bottom, hips have to roll over. If I start ribs down, cannonball breathing, okay, I got my abs tight like I'm about to get kicked by a mule. And if I squeeze my glutes through the entire range of motion, my back is flat the entire time. So what do we have here? We have increased stability through the midsection. We have the potential to maintain better spine health. We're eliminating movement dysfunction. Remember, to use your hips properly, to optimize the role of your joints, of your main movers, you have to stop synchronizing them with other parts of your body. A tenet of movement dysfunction is people bleeding their hip movement into their spine movement. You want them separate. Remember, everything from the waist up is designed to inhibit movement. Those are bracing muscles, those are isometric muscles. Everything below the waist is a main mover. That's what's moving your knees, what's moving your hips. You want to be able to have a handle on how they do their job independently before you can effectively have them do their job together. So I've described over and over cannonball breathing. That's to differentiate from the big belly Valsalva arched breath that you take, where you arch and take a big breath and squeeze. That's a quick and dirty way. That's the way that fosters movement dysfunction. The cannonball breathing, you start with good posture. So glutes are tight, hips are rolled under into a neutral position, your ribs are down, abdominals pulled in, and it's like you're locking your ribs down into your hips, like you would latch a briefcase. Lock it down, so your obliques should be tight, your abdominals should be tight. You breathe into those tensed abdominals and squeeze as if you're about to get punched in the stomach. If you're about to get punched in this, if you're about to take a cannonball into the stomach, you wouldn't just take a deep breath and push your belly all the way out and hold it. You would want your abdominals tight. You would want some density there, okay? You would want them ready to take that impact. And that is the last thing I think before I initiate any movement under a load. When I'm at the bottom of a deadlift, the last thing I do before I pull the bar is I tense like I'm about to get kicked in the stomach. When I'm squatting, the last thing I do before I descent, I squeeze the abdominals like I'm about to get kicked in the stomach. That reinforces the proper distribution of tension in your midsection and make sure that you are equally supported on all sides. We have the guy wire analogy. Don't think of your back as being what keeps your spine healthy, because it's not. It's just one aspect. We have your obliques that keep equal and opposite tension off to the side. We have your abdominals and your erectors that keep equal and opposite tension. If one side is loose, if one side is not pulling as hard, you are going to have massive instability, and you are asking for your spine to take on more stress than it needs to, given what you're actually doing. Now also remember that if you're tight or if you have flexibility or mobility issues, a lot of that can be traced back to improper bracing. I was at a seminar where the guys from Dark Side Strength, it was so many years back, Ryan Brown and Quinn Hennock, they demonstrated that lifters actually got an immediate increase in their hamstring range of motion after they went through a series of bracing drills. Meaning that when you are appropriately stable in the key areas where you need to be, your body will actually permit more movement and more range than you would get otherwise. Your body's always looking for tension. So if you're loosey-goosey in the stomach, your body's gonna be looking for tension and limitation to prevent you from getting injured. So to be able to accommodate full ranges of motion, to get to the bottom of a squat, to be able to keep your elbows high on a press, you gotta make sure that everything starting at your center is tight, and that will allow this extra movement and these extra ranges through different planes of motion. So to put it all together, again, it doesn't matter how you're squatting, high bar, low bar, wide, narrow. I'm just gonna go over my squat positioning, and I'm gonna demonstrate step by step how I get tight before I descend into the hole. So I get the bar where I want it. I have my feet planted. The first thing is the glutes and hips. Then I bring the ribs down. I lock my obliques into my hips. And right now my abdominals are tensed. So right now I know that I am stable and I'm braced and I'm ready to descend. So with my glutes tight, my abs tense, I breathe into the tensed abs. I practice that cannonball breathing and I descend. It takes a lot of energy and focus at first, and you might get frustrated early on because you're often going to get pulled out of position. We have a lot of different boxes we have to check for that to come off the right way. When you're doing reps, it's very important that you reset at the top of each rep and you don't try to bulldoze through your reps hoping that you kept the same position. Also, put a camera on yourself. This is not something that you can go by feel. You will think you're doing it correctly and it will feel good, and you're gonna be devastated when you finally see a video recording and you find that it's wonky and it looks like shit and you really haven't fixed anything. Eventually, enough of these points are gonna become automatic where you don't have to fixate on them so heavily for every single rep. But for now, take it seriously. Take time focusing on it during your warm-ups. If you can't maintain these position cues when the weight starts to climb up, it's important that you take the weight down until you do get it, because otherwise you're just gonna be progressing into movement dysfunction, and I promise you things will get a lot worse before they get better. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions or if there's anything I didn't cover, go ahead and leave it in the comments. Once again, I have my Breathing and Bracing ebook at the bottom. It's absolutely free. It's 50 pages. It's a lot of how I fix my own back health issues, and it pulls from a lot of other really good sources to give kind of a comprehensive view on how important your midsection is to keeping you healthy, but also optimizing performance. So absolutely free. Click on it. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, guys. Until next time, this is Bromley at Empire Barbell. I'll see you.